I moved back to my parents' house for a few months after the company I worked for downsized. They were spending that summer in Florida taking care of my grandmother, and it was easier to save money in the empty house than scrape by in a studio in the city. I told myself it would be temporary, just until something else came up. The neighborhood hadn't changed much since I was a kid. Same maple trees along the curb, same mailboxes leaning at tired angles, same cul-de-sacs with chalk drawings that got washed away in the rain. People waved when you drove past. The lawns were neat in that slightly competitive way, and the HOA newsletter still arrived on the first Tuesday of the month with reminders about hedge height and holiday decorations. The only house that felt different to me was the one across the street. It always had. When I was little, my friends and I used to make up stories about it, the way kids do. We'd call it the Watcher House or the Copy House. Back then, it was just because the blinds were always half closed and the siding never quite matched. As an adult, I knew it was just a rental that turned over every couple of years. Some years you'd get a quiet family. Other years a guy who idled his truck at 5 a.m. all summer. But that summer, the blinds were closed again, and the same car sat in the driveway for days at a time. At night, I'd sometimes catch a low blue light through the slats like a TV was on in a room nobody entered. My first week back, I set up my old bedroom the way it had been in high school, but with fewer posters. The closet door still stuck in humid weather. My window faced the street. At night, with the lamp off and the blinds tilted open, I could see my reflection in the glass, and behind it, the dark slice of the opposite window, where the blue TV glow came and went. I don't remember exactly when I noticed him. The second or third night, probably. It was late, after midnight, and I was lying on my bed scrolling through job listings. I felt this light pressure under my skin, the kind you get when you realize someone is looking at you. I glanced up and saw a pale vertical shape in the crack between the blinds across the street. It could have been a reflection or a trick of light, until it didn't move. It was a face, the shape of a head at least. No details I could make out, just the pale oval against the dark room. Staring. I froze with my thumb hovering over the screen. For a second I told myself to wave, to do something normal and shrug it off, because the longer you treat something like it's strange, the stranger it becomes. But I didn't wave. I let my phone go dark, and without that light tethering me to anything normal, I felt I'd drifted over some line. The face stayed. After 30 seconds, maybe a minute, the blinds slatted closed an inch, another inch. Then the window went dark. I didn't sleep well that night. It would have been easy to say it was just some neighbor, maybe the renter I'd never seen, curious about the new car in our driveway. People notice when someone comes back to their parents' place. There's a kind of gossip that fills empty evenings. The next morning, though, I noticed something else. Our mailbox flag was up. The mail carrier doesn't come until the afternoon, and my parents get most things electronically. I walked out in sandals and opened the mailbox. Inside was a single envelope, no stamp. My last name neatly printed in blue ink on the front. Through the slot in the back of the mailbox, I could see the street, and across it, the opposite driveway. A white sedan, the blinds half closed, the window still. I carried the envelope back inside, telling myself it was probably a welcome note from the HOA, though they usually tape those to the door. I broke the seal with my thumb. No letter. Just a small square photograph stuck to a piece of thick paper with a glue dot. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. It was a picture of our living room from the perspective of the staircase. The lights were off, and the streetlight painted that sodium glow through the sheer curtains. On the couch, I was lying on my side with one knee bent, my face turned away, phone face down on my chest. It was the night before, exactly the way I'd fallen asleep. I checked the back for some explanation. There was nothing written. The edges were clean. A print, not a screen grab. The kind of photo you have to get processed or print yourself. For a while, I just stood there in the kitchen turning the photo in my hands. The coffee machine gurgled to itself. A lawnmower started somewhere down the block. It was the kind of morning noise that makes you doubt your own unease. Then I set the photo on the counter and went room to room checking doors and windows. Everything was locked. The back sliding door has a warped frame that you have to shoulder to make it latch, and it had the stick jammed in the track the way my dad always kept it. There were no signs anyone had been inside, no footprints, no moved chairs, nothing out of place. I told myself the angle was wrong, the staircase angle. Maybe it was from the bottom of the steps looking up. Maybe it was an old photo. But I knew that was a lie as soon as I told it. My luggage was visible on the living room floor in the picture. The scuffed red duffel I'd dragged in the day I arrived. I put the photo in a drawer and sat down on the couch exactly where I had been in the picture. The cushions were still indented. I opened my phone and went to the camera roll expecting, hoping, to find some explanation. Nothing. No photos of the room from that angle. No hidden albums I hadn't created. No evidence I'd taken it myself. I don't know why I didn't go to the police right then. Partly because I couldn't articulate what I'd be reporting. Someone took a picture of me sleeping and left it in my mailbox. Sounds like a prank. Proof I'd been watched, sure. But by whom? And from where? You can stand on a public sidewalk and see into most people's living rooms. That's what blinds are for. It felt like a note, yes, but one a technically careful person had written precisely because it said nothing. No fingerprints. No handwriting I could pin to a face. Just the fact of the watching, which is hard to prosecute. I pulled the living room curtains shut. Then I closed the kitchen ones. I went upstairs and dragged a chair to my bedroom window and closed those blinds too. Then opened them again, because if anyone was watching, I didn't want to confirm I was afraid. It's dumb. The psychology of visibility. Hide and you only prove your prey. But I still put a pillowcase over the little green power light on the router, because the thought that someone could be piggybacking on the Wi-Fi made my stomach go cold. That night I kept the TV on quietly in my room and fell asleep with the remote in my hand. Around 2:30 I woke up because there was a light in the room that wasn't there when I went to sleep. I realized quickly it wasn't inside. It was outside, an amber wash moving slowly across the ceiling like the reflection of a car turning a corner. I went to the window and tilted one slat. Directly across from me, on the patch of grass between the sidewalk and the curb, someone was standing under the streetlight looking at our house. From above it looked like a black shape with a pale top. Dark clothes. Uncovered head. The head tilted slowly, like he was trying to see past the glass into my room despite the angle. My first instinct was to drop to the floor and crawl to the door. That's not an instinct you learn watching movies. That's something primal. The sense that anything framed in a window is a target. I slid down the wall with my back pressed to it and lay there listening. I heard a car door slam somewhere behind the house, one of those sounds that could be 2 blocks away and still sound like it's in your yard. I counted to 60, then another 60. When I eased up and peeked again, the side of the streetlight was empty. I didn't sleep after that. Around 5, the birds started, and the world lightened by degrees until it was just another morning. When I went to the mailbox, there was only grocery circulars and a dentist flyer. I took a walk around the block and told myself I'd stop by the house across the street on the way back. Introduce myself. Make a normal interaction out of something that was getting abnormal in my head. But when I returned, the blinds were closed, the car was gone, and that house looked like a photograph of a house, flat and impossible to enter. Around lunch, I went over with a Tupperware of leftover brownies because it felt less weird than just knocking. From up close, the place smelled faintly sour like old carpet. There were 2 dead moths curled in the porch light glass. I knocked and waited. The sound was dull in a way that said there was nobody moving inside. I knocked again and set the Tupperware on the mat so if someone came home, they'd see it. That's what I told myself. Really, I wanted to see if it moved. A stake. Like people leave outside a tent when they camp so they can tell if something was there while they slept. The Tupperware was still on the mat that evening. When I woke up the next morning, it was gone. No note. No dish returned. Just gone. On the 3rd day, I installed a motion camera above our front door. My parents had one boxed up in the hall closet from a few Christmases ago that my dad never got around to mounting. It connected to my phone easily enough. I angled it to catch the driveway and the slice of sidewalk across the street. That night, every shadow on the lawn became a person. The camera pinged my phone when a moth flew too close. At 2:11 a.m., it sent an alert and saved a clip. I sat up in bed with the phone against my chest and tapped the notification. The clip was 10 seconds long. For the first 4 seconds, there was nothing but the smear of light across the asphalt and our own front steps in night vision gray. Then a figure entered the left edge of the frame and stopped almost dead center at the top of our driveway across the street. I could tell he was tall because he cast a long shadow that fell across the crown of the street like a pointer. He turned toward the camera and lifted his hand slowly, like he was counting the points of light he could see. The camera's infrared gave him weird eyes, twin marbles reflecting heat. The clip ended before he lowered his hand. I replayed it 3 times. 8 seconds in, 2 little white dots reflected and then moved slightly. That was the part that made my skin crawl. Because the movement wasn't a blink. It was a shift from the left eye to the right eye, like one lens was sliding in place to focus. I know that sounds stupid. I'm not saying he had lenses in his eyes. I'm saying the movement was not human slow. It felt like a mechanism. I saved the clip and stared at the ceiling until morning. Then I went to the police station with the envelope, the photo, and my phone. The officer at the desk listened and was sympathetic in the way that people get when they can't do much. He asked if the man had tried to enter the house, if there was any damage to my property, if I'd recognized him, if I'd gotten a license plate number. He typed while I talked and gave me a complaint number and told me to call if the person returned and I felt threatened. He said, "This time of year we get a lot of porch pirates. Cameras are good." On the way home, I drove past the opposite house slowly, pretending to check the mail. The blinds were still closed. The porch light glass was empty now. The door was the kind you can buy at any home improvement store and paint to look like wood. That afternoon, my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Do you remember me?" I stared at it long enough that the bubble faded from my focus and became just a milky stain. I typed, "Who is this?" and deleted it. I typed, "Lose my number," and deleted that too. Then I walked around the house and made sure every door and window was locked again. The last time I'd been this jumpy, I was in high school, and we thought someone had been egging cars, and it was just a possum getting into the trash. Another text came through. "I watched you grow up." That's the thing about being back in your childhood house. It makes you think about eyes at the bus stop, about the woman who always watered her lawn at the exact time your mom left for work. It dredges up small, ordinary surveillance you didn't notice when you were a kid. I typed, "Who is this?" and hit send. The typing bubble popped up and vanished 3 times like a stutter of breath. The reply was a picture. My front door from the street, taken sometime that afternoon. The angle was a little higher than eye level. If you zoomed in, you could see the camera I'd mounted under the eaves, and in the dark oval of its lens, you could see a warped reflection of a person in a black jacket holding a phone. I called the number. It rang once and cut off. When I called again, it went straight to voicemail. That was just the default mechanical voice reading out a series of zeros. I blocked the number and then realized that wouldn't matter if the person had a dozen burners. When it got dark, I left the downstairs lights on like a cheap deterrent and sat on the floor of my bedroom with my back to the bed so I could see the door and the window at the same time. I'm not brave. I kept telling myself I'd leave in the morning and go stay with my friend Jared across town, that there was no reason to pretend I wasn't rattled. Around 1 a.m., I heard a single soft knock from somewhere below. It was so light I wasn't sure it wasn't the house settling. Then another, exactly the same, and then another. Not at the front door. Somewhere in the walls. I texted Jared, "Are you up?" and watched the dots appear and disappear. He wrote back 4 minutes later, "What's up?" Before I could respond, I heard the porch camera click, and then the soft chime on my phone that meant it had detected motion. I tapped the notification. A live view came up, glitching slightly like it does when it's shifting resolutions. The porch looked empty. Then, in the bottom right corner, a shadow moved. It wasn't a person. It was the dark shape of the front door itself, just a shade darker than the rest, tilting inward a fraction and then slamming back with a hollow clack. The deadbolt was in, but the force moved the door enough that it rattled in the frame. The camera's microphone picked up a breathy exhale, and then my own house settled again. Before I could run downstairs, there was a new sound directly above me. A soft scrape like a box sliding across attic insulation. The ceiling flexed almost imperceptibly. I stood without fully deciding to and stared at the corner where the ceiling meets the wall. There's a hairline crack there that looks like a branch. Something pressed down on it, and the crack widened by a millimeter. My hand went cold and slick, and I dialed 911. My voice sounded calm to myself, in a way that made me feel like I was watching someone else talk. I told the operator my address, and that someone was on my porch, and maybe in the attic. While I was still on the phone, I walked into the hallway and looked up at the square panel that covers the attic access. The string that hangs from it was moving, not swinging wildly, just turning in a slow circle. The operator asked if I could safely exit the house. I said yes, and realized I hadn't locked the back door. I moved as quietly as I could down the stairs and cut through the dark kitchen, blind on muscle memory. Every corner felt like it was swollen with someone holding their breath. The sliding door stuck, and for a second I thought it wouldn't open. When I got it moving, it made that teeth-on-metal squeal that announces you to the whole block. I stepped onto the patio and felt the cooler air slap my skin. The yard smelled like damp dirt and laundry vent lint. I skirted the hedge and came around to the driveway. The street was almost painfully empty. My eyes went straight to the house across the street. Its second-story window was a rectangle of darker dark, and behind the tilt of the blinds a pale shape hovered as if looking down at me. There was something wrong with the position of it. The angle. If someone was looking down from that window, the pale shape should have been their face, and there should have been depth. But it looked pressed flat, like a photograph held against glass from the other side. I heard sirens in the distance. I didn't wait for them. I got in my car and kept the lights off until I was at the stop sign. Then I flicked them on and drove 2 streets over and parked under someone else's tree and watched until the patrol car pulled up in front of my house. The officers went through the house with me after they checked the porch and yard. The attic hatch had shifted in its frame by maybe a 1/4 inch on one side. There were faint smears on the ceiling around it you could interpret as fingerprints if you wanted to be scared. The officers didn't want to be scared. They were rational and brisk. Probably thermal expansion, one said, tapping the panel so it clicked back into place. These new roofs breathe, especially after heat radiates all day. I showed them the texts and the door camera clip and the earlier photo. They took down an incident report and recommended better motion lights, which felt like telling someone to get a bigger umbrella in a hurricane. I asked if they would check the house across the street. "We can't go knocking on doors without cause," one said. He offered to drive around the block a few times that night. I thanked them because thank yous are part of the script. After they left, I dragged the ladder out of the garage and checked the attic myself. I told myself there was nothing worse up there than insulation itch, and that if I didn't look, I'd never sleep. The attic smelled the way attics do, of hot dust and old paper. My flashlight beam made a clean tunnel through the haze, and everything outside it looked like it had been erased. I saw the HVAC lines, the satiny backs of roof tiles, boxes over the rafters where my mom kept Christmas things. The insulation was smooth, undisturbed. On my way back toward the hatch, I found a piece of black thread caught on a splinter. It was thin and glossy like it had been pulled from a jacket cuff. I told myself it could have been mine from the ladder, or a spider line catching the light wrong. I pocketed it anyway and went back down. The next morning there was a chalk mark on the curb by the end of our driveway. Just a short white line, like someone dragging a piece of chalk across the concrete half-heartedly. When I knelt to look at it, I realized it wasn't chalk at all. It was something scraped into the surface, shallow but deliberate, like a box cutter line. It ran parallel to the street, and then hooked sharply toward the opposite house like a crude arrow. If you spend too much time alone in a quiet place, you start to see patterns. That's what I kept telling myself. Arrows, eyes in windows, random knocks. The mind craves order even in fear, especially in fear. But by then this wasn't pattern seeking. It was a pattern. That afternoon I called my parents and told them I was thinking about moving out of the house sooner than planned. My mom asked if everything was okay, and I said yes, because I didn't want her to worry from 1,000 miles away. She told me to take whatever money I needed from the emergency envelope in the desk. After we hung up, I opened the desk drawer and saw the envelope exactly where she said it would be. Underneath it was the photograph of me sleeping that I had put away days earlier. Only now there were faint depressions in the corners where someone had pressed a thumb a little too hard, like it had been lifted and returned. That evening, I noticed something that made the little hairs along my arms stand up. My bedroom window faces directly across to the second-story window of the opposite house. I'd always known they aligned, same floor plan mirrored across the street. At dusk, the light level in the two houses matched enough that each window became a dark mirror. I stood back from my blinds and watched the opposite one. My lamp was on behind me, casting my faint reflection into the glass. On the other side, in the opposite window, a shape matched me. Not in real time exactly, a half beat off. When I raised my right hand slowly, the shadow in the opposite window raised its left a second later. It wasn't a mirror image. It was a person copying a mirror image. If you've ever watched a video call with a slight delay, you know the feeling. Not wrong exactly. Uncanny. I lowered my hand. The opposite shadow lowered theirs. I stepped to the side and leaned, and the opposite did too. 1 second later than they should have if they were just reacting. I walked forward until my shoulder touched the warm glass. Across the street, the shape leaned too, and in that moment I knew two things at once. 1. There was a person in that room watching me and making fun of the basic facts of my body. 2. The timing wasn't theirs to control. The delay was baked in. A distance you could measure. I snapped the blinds closed and sat on the floor again. There are kinds of fear that feel like a lot of things at once. Anger, vulnerability, humiliation, the memory of being looked at when you didn't want to be. This felt like being erased a molecule at a time, like the window had been given the job of reproducing me somewhere else less gentle. I could have left right then. I should have. I even put a bag together and loaded it in the car with my laptop and some clothes. On the porch, I paused and turned back because I thought I heard something. Not a knock this time. A soft metallic ticking. It was coming from the vicinity of the living room, then from upstairs, then from the kitchen. It took me almost a minute to recognize it. It was the sound my phone makes when the porch camera saves a clip. It was going off every 10 seconds. Ping, ping, ping. I opened the app. The camera had recorded 37 clips, each 10 seconds long, in the last 10 minutes. I tapped the most recent. The porch was empty. The timestamp read 2:11 a.m. above the clip. That was wrong. It was not 2 in the morning. I checked the phone clock. 8:24 p.m. I backed up and tapped the previous clip. It said 2:10 a.m. The one before that was 2:09. The weather in the clips was different. There was a thin fog on the street. The neighbor's yard across the way had their sprinkler running, and the spray was visible like static in the camera's IR. I scrolled to the first of the burst. It was labeled 1:33 a.m. In the top right corner of the frame, an insect landed on the lens and scurried out of view. 10 seconds later, at 1:34, another clip. Empty porch. At 1:35, empty. This went on until the 2:11 clip, when something new appeared. A shape moved smoothly into the frame from the right, not walking but sliding, like the lens was moving, and the figure was stationary. That didn't make sense. The figure stopped at the center of the porch and turned toward the door. He wore a dark jacket with a high collar. The camera's night vision blew out his scalp, so it looked like a white cap. He reached into his pocket and took out something small. For a moment I thought it was a coin he was flipping. He held it to the camera lens, and it reflected the IR back in a tiny violent flare. It was an eye, or something that wanted to look like an eye. A marble, maybe. A polished lens. The figure lifted it, fitted it to his own eye socket, and the flare moved with his head. The clip ended. The one after it picked up mid-motion, like nothing had been interrupted. He leaned close to the door. For 10 seconds, he was inside the camera's minimum focusing distance. Just a soft gray smear and the sound of a very slow exhale. In the next clip, he wasn't there. The porch was empty. The fog in the street was thicker. I scrolled to the end of the burst. The timestamps rolled over past 2:11 and then jumped back to 1:33 and did the whole set again. It was a loop, a very long loop that the app kept labeling as live motion. I unplugged the camera and the ticking stopped. I put my phone face down on the table and stood there listening to the pressure in my head reduce. It felt like taking off tight headphones and realizing how loud your own blood is. When I picked up the phone again, there was a new text from a different number. It was a screenshot of my own phone screen showing the porch camera app. The same set of looping clips. Only in the screenshot, the 2:11 clip showed something different. When the man lifted the small eye to his socket, he turned toward the street instead of the door, and the reflection that blew out the lens wasn't the camera's IR. It was another, smaller reflection inside the small eye. If you zoomed in, you could see 2 houses framed in its curved surface, mine and the one across the street. In the small eye, the opposite house's second-story window was lit from within by a square of flat light, and inside that square was the shape of a person 20 seconds behind me. I left that night. I drove to Jared's place with the bag I'd packed. I didn't tell him the whole thing because at some point a story has too many edges, and it starts cutting the listener. He put blankets on the couch and made a joke about how free rent is never free. And we watched a bad movie until midnight, and I tried to let my body catch up to my decision to leave. I still had the keys in my pocket. Around 2 a.m, I realized I'd left the ladder out and the sliding door stick on the kitchen counter, and decided I needed to go back in the daylight to fix those. That's what I told myself. But I knew I was going to drive by. It's like checking the stove 6 times when you already know it's off. You want the act of looking to change the underlying fact. I was up at 6 and in the car by 6:15. The neighborhood was quiet in that specific morning way, when you can hear garage doors opening 2 blocks over and someone dragging their trash cans and a dog's nails ticking on concrete. As I turned onto my street, I saw the white sedan parked in the opposite driveway. The blinds were up. That was new. In the second-story window, the pale rectangle of a TV reflected the morning light. My own house looked smaller than it had looked the night before, as if taking the decision to leave had robbed it of mass. I parked half up the driveway with the nose of the car pointed out in case I wanted to leave quickly. The front walk had small fossilized leaves embedded in it from some long-ago storm. I let myself in and stood for a second just inside, listening. Houses talk. They creak and click and shift and sigh. This one was holding its breath. I checked the back door and wedged the stick back in the track. I collapsed the ladder and hauled it back into the garage. I walked from room to room collecting anything with my name on it, like someone preparing to abandon a place ahead of a flood. On my way out, I noticed the corner of an envelope tucked under the front doormat. Under it, placed carefully so you had to pick it up to see, was a folded piece of paper I recognized by the texture before I unfolded it. It was the thick photo paper. The image was of my bedroom from what looked like the opposite house's second-story window. You could see my bed, the lamp, the chair I'd dragged over to close the blinds. The blinds were open in the picture, a little. Through the slats, my face was visible, blurry, sleeping. I was wearing a different shirt in that picture than in the first photo from the mailbox. It wasn't from the same night. I looked up across the street and made eye contact with no one in particular. The window was just a rectangle of matte white because the morning sun was in my eyes. I folded the picture without looking down and put it in my pocket. Then I locked the door and went back to Jared's. I stayed there for a week. I told the neighbors on either side of my parents' place that I was away for a few days and asked them to text me if they saw anything weird. The woman 2 houses down, Janine, who runs the block party, asked if everything was all right. I said yes. She said, "That renter across from your folks gives me the creeps." She told me she'd seen him take his trash out at 3 a.m. in a rainstorm. Like he didn't want anyone to see what day of the week he was putting it out. She laughed. I laughed too. Then she added, in the way people do when they've been waiting to say something, "The house is a bit of a lemon. Every 2 years the renters change. It's never the same person on the lease as the person who actually lives there. I think there's an owner who doesn't live in state. I don't know. The HOAs tried to track it down. On the 4th day, I got a text from the first unknown number again, the same string of zeros on the voicemail. The text was 2 words, "Come home." I blocked that number too. Then I thought better of it and unblocked it. Putting your head in the sand has limits. On the 6th day, Janine texted me a picture of the street taken from her front yard. It was dusk, sky a dull bruised blue. You could see my parents' house and the one across from it. In the picture, the opposite house's upstairs window was lit, and the blinds were fully up. That in itself was unusual. But what stuck in my mind was the detail I didn't want to see. The room visible in that window looked like my room. Same bed placement, same lamp shape, same sag in the mattress. On the wall above the bed was a framed print from my college apartment. I never got around to rehanging. It wasn't a photograph of my room. It was my room. I drove over without telling Jared where I was going because I knew he would try to talk me out of it. When I turned onto the street, the white sedan was gone again. The house across the way had its upstairs light on. The blinds were still up. There was a person in the window, maybe 6 or 7 feet back from the glass, watching the street. I couldn't make out details. The sun was down, but the sky still held light, and that left the interior as a kind of framed darkness. The person moved once, a slow shift of weight, and I had the strong impression of someone tall with their hands in their jacket pockets. I got out of the car and stood on my front walk. I swallowed and tasted dust. "Okay," I said out loud to myself, because sometimes hearing your voice reminds your body it belongs to you. I crossed the street. At the opposite porch, I hesitated only a second before knocking. The knock sounded too loud. It echoed in a way that made me think the entryway was bare. I knocked again, and then tried the knob because that's what you do in polite neighborhoods. You test a boundary and pretend it's a mistake if you cross it. The knob turned. I didn't open the door all the way. I wasn't stupid. I eased it 3 inches and said, "Hello?" in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. The hallway beyond was dim. It had the same layout as ours: stairs to the left, living room straight ahead, kitchen at the back. The air smelled like dust and solvent. A television murmured somewhere upstairs, the same tinny blue I'd watched through the blinds for days. I stepped into the hall a foot, then two. The door clicked softly behind me as a cross draft pulled it. My heart beat in my ears like someone drumming fingers. "Hello?" I called again. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked deliberately. The creak of someone taking a step on the edge of a board to make it speak. I could have turned around and left. I should have. Instead, I moved to the foot of the stairs and looked up. The banister was a match to ours. Same scuffs at knee height from some past owner's kids. At the top of the stairs, the hallway was dim, and on the right, where my room would be in our house, a door was open a few inches. Blue light flickered across the carpet there. The smell of dust was sharper up here, a hot metallic tang like overheated wiring. The first stair I put weight on let out a tiny cry. The second was silent. I climbed slowly, hand sliding on the banister, earmarking each sound my body made, the way the carpet gave, the way the air moved. When I reached the top, I realized something I should have realized earlier. There were no pictures on the walls, not at eye level where people usually hang them. But when I looked down, the way your eyes do when they're searching for other eyes, I saw small squares of pale on the baseboards at floor level. They were prints, maybe animal tracks at a glance. But when I crouched, I saw they were faces. Hundreds of tiny face stickers, cheap and flat, placed where a child might arrange things, looking up from ankle height. The faces had no eyes, just oval blanks where eyes should be, as if erased with a finger before the ink dried. The open door to the right exhaled blue. I stood and put my palm against the wall to steady myself, and felt a faint vibration under the paint, like an appliance running somewhere behind the dry wall. My hand came away dusty. I reached the door and pushed it gently with the back of my knuckles. I looked into my own room. Not exactly. Close enough to make the mismatch nauseating. The bed was where my bed is. The lamp was the same lamp, or a convincing copy. The nightstand had the same shallow scratch across its surface from when I once dropped a set of keys there too hard. The only part that didn't match was the wall opposite the bed. In my room at my parents' house, there's a window there. In this room, there was a window-shaped recess. But instead of glass, it held a sheet of matte white material that seemed to glow without projecting light. It was like the anti-screen of a TV. The glow was cool, the way a refrigerator light is cool when you open the door at night. On the bed, the blanket was rumpled just enough to suggest someone had gotten up recently. The pillow had the faint oval of a head. There were no dust rings under the objects, which means they had been placed and replaced regularly. The air was humming gently at a frequency that made my molars itch. "Hello?" I said again, because I didn't have any other word for the situation. The house answered with a sound from downstairs, the front door trying the latch, a soft scrape as if someone's shoulder leaned into it. I stepped backward into the hall and closed the bedroom door softly, without taking my eyes off the window. That wasn't a window. The glow deepened a shade, as if it were listening. In the hallway, someone was standing at the far end by the stairs. Tall, jacket, hands in pockets. He didn't move for a long second, Then he took one step forward and stopped. His head tilted in a way that felt like a question, that had only two answers. Run or don't. I couldn't move. It wasn't paralysis. It was the way you hesitate at the top of a ladder. Not because you're scared of heights, but because your body knows a wrong step is a script you won't be able to edit later. "Do you remember me?" he asked, and I recognized the voice not because I'd heard it before, but because it fit. Quiet, patient. Not a voice you'd turn around to look at in a grocery store, which is what made it terrifying. "No," I said. "I don't." He took another step. I could see more detail now. Dark hair clipped short. Pale skin in the hollow of the throat above the jacket collar. His eyes looked off, not because they were strange in themselves, but because they were focused too far behind me, as if there were something interesting on the wall behind my head. "You grew up here," he said. "You spent afternoons on the curb with your skateboard. Your mother watered the hedges and made you come in for dinner when the streetlight came on. People think the important thing in moments like that is to figure out how they know. It isn't. The important thing is to create pressure elsewhere to avoid getting crushed by the pressure in the hallway." "Who are you?" I asked. The question sounded rote even to me. The house hummed. The white panel in the room behind me got a shade whiter and then darker, like something moving behind it had passed closer to the surface and then farther away. He smiled reflexively, like someone trying out an expression they'd seen used successfully by others. "I like your routine," he said. "Most people fight it." He took his hands out of his pockets, and I took a step back without meaning to. He held up his right hand, and between his thumb and forefinger was the small lens I'd seen on the camera clip, or one like it, a polished bead the size of a pea. He touched it to his right eye, and I had the painful sensation of watching a contact lens go in dry. He blinked once, and the lens seated, and when it did, his head seemed to move a fraction out of sync with itself, a little echo gesture that arrived a beat late. He looked past me into the room and said, "It's better when you don't turn the lights on. The white works harder." I didn't plan what I did next. If I had planned it, I wouldn't have done it. I stepped into my knot room, grabbed the lamp by the neck, and swung it at the white panel like a bat. The bulb shattered. The shade crushed and the base rang against the wall with a crack that felt satisfying in my bones. A hairline fissure appeared in the white surface, running from the top right corner toward the center like a lightning fork. Behind the crack there was an absence, not darkness exactly, but a place the light didn't know how to fill. The man in the hallway made a sound that wasn't surprise and wasn't anger. It was disappointment. He took 2 fast steps, and I swung the broken lamp back toward the doorway and connected with his wrist. The small eye popped loose and bounced once and rolled under the bed like a marble escaping a game. He swore, a very ordinary swear word, and I used that moment of ordinary to run. I went past him so close our shoulders brushed and his jacket was rough against my arm. He reached for me and caught my shirt, and the collar tore and I stumbled but didn't fall. I went down the stairs 2 at a time and out the front door and didn't stop running until I was in the middle of the street. When I looked back, the 2nd-story window was dark. The blinds dropped as if someone had cut the cords. The downstairs door swung shut by itself and latched with that soft metallic sound the camera had recorded. The street was empty. My own porch light clicked on because something had moved near it. Me, probably. And then off again. I called the police standing there in the road and gave them the address of the house I'd just been in and the complaint number from last time. I told them a man had chased me out of a house that was set up like mine. I told them there was something wrong with the back wall of the upstairs bedroom. I told them there were little eyeless faces on the baseboards. I could hear myself and knew how it sounded. 2 patrol cars came. The officers went in. They stayed inside longer than I wanted them to. When they came out, their expressions were carefully neutral. "Nobody's inside now," one said. "The upstairs has some unusual decor." "Decor," I repeated, because sometimes you have to chew the word a person gives you to see if it's meat or gristle. "There's a panel in the wall," the other said, flipping his notebook closed. "We'll notify the property owner to address the code issues." "What's behind it?" I asked. "Substrate," he said. "Plasterboard. It's probably covering a structural fault. We're not permitted to damage property without cause." I thought of the crack in the white surface and how it wasn't plaster, and how it didn't sound like anything when it cracked, not the way plaster does. I didn't argue. One of the officers suggested I file for a restraining order, but you can't put one of those against a man with no name and a voice you can't describe. They said they'd increase patrols. They left. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't go back in my parents' house either. I sat in my car with the doors locked and watched the 2 dark rectangles of the windows across the street. Around 3 in the morning, a low ground fog settled along the curb and flowed slowly toward the drains, like something living that preferred to move while everyone else slept. By morning, I'd decided to move out for real. Not just to Jared's, but out of the state. It was impulsive, maybe, but I had family in another city, and the idea of sleeping in a place without a copy across the street felt like oxygen. I spent the day packing what mattered and leaving what didn't. I tried not to think about the small eye that had rolled under the bed across the street. I told myself it was a marble, and that in the daylight it would just be a glass bead laughing at me. 2 weeks later, I was in a new apartment in a new city. The windows faced a brick wall. It was reassuring. I took the porch camera out of the box because part of me still wanted to know if my fear could be quantified, and another part of me wanted proof that fear only lives where you let it. I mounted it above my new door and connected it to my phone. The first night it recorded the delivery guy and a moth and nothing else. The second night, it recorded nothing. The third night, at 2:11 a.m., it pinged softly, and when I tapped the notification, the clip that loaded was of my parents' front porch, the old sodium streetlight, and 3 seconds in, the figure stepping to the center of the frame and lifting a small bright eye toward the camera. The label in the corner read "Live." I unplugged it and threw it in a drawer, and taught myself to live with the dark. Once in a while, if I'm walking home late and the wind is right, I catch a glance of a window in a building across the street, and for a second, the light within looks flat in that way the panel did, the light that wasn't light. I tell myself it's just the way glass reflects when you look at it from an angle. I tell myself everything that happened that summer is territorial. Someone with too much time and too much skill and a private humor messing with a person who had decided, by moving back to the wrong house at the wrong time, to be visible. The rest, the delay in the window, the white panel, the looped door clips with the fog rolling in and out of order, I attribute to fatigue, to the way the brain stitches threat together from scraps. One day my mom called from Florida to tell me the HOA finally made contact with the owner of the opposite house. She said there was some confusion. The county records listed 2 properties on that lot, one with a house, one without. A surveying error, she said, and laughed. The same house twice. Your father thinks it's a paperwork duplicate that never got fixed. Tell them to fix it, I said, and kept my voice light. A month after I moved, a letter arrived at my new place with no return address. The postmark was from my parents' town. Inside was a single photo printed on thick paper. It was my new living room, taken from the angle of the small hallway by the bathroom. I was on the couch, asleep, one knee bent, phone face down on my stomach. In the reflection on the TV, if you looked closely, really closely, you could see a pale oval in the window across from where I lay. An oval that could have been the moon or a streetlight. If you turned the photo and caught the light at just the right angle, the oval shifted in a way light shouldn't, as if a small lens had been pressed into the paper and then lifted again, leaving the thinnest trace of the world behind it. I don't hang curtains. I don't open my blinds either. I live between the states of looking and being looked at, because it turns out that drawing a line between those things is a job, and you have to do it every day. Sometimes, late, when I set my phone down and the room goes quiet, I think I hear a very faint hum through the wall, the kind of sound you don't notice until it stops. And every once in a while, maybe once a month, maybe less, the doorbell camera app I swore I wouldn't open pings softly at 2:11 in the morning, and when I make the mistake of looking, the clip it shows me is just a little out of season, like weather from a different week, a fog from somewhere else rolling in as if the street outside has a twin, exactly like it, whose clocks tick a second late. There are handprints on my baseboards. I noticed them last week while pulling a box out of the hall closet. They're small and low to the ground, and at first I thought they were smudges from where I scuffed the vacuum. But if you crouch down and really look, they're not hands. They're faces. Small, cheap stickers. The eyes are blank. If I peel one up, I know in my gut there will be nothing under it but clean paint. I don't peel them up. I step over them and keep my eyes forward. I've learned that some things in the suburbs are just copy errors that never get corrected. A hedge that grows into its mirror across the street. A porch light that goes out in tandem with its opposite without anyone flipping a switch. A person who looks at you from a second-story window on a street that's not the one you're standing on. I can live with those. The other kind of thing, the human kind, is harder. The possibility that someone learned me like a routine and decided to keep doing the steps even after I left the stage. That there's a person under one of those jackets, capable of letting themselves into quiet places and leaving a picture on a counter that puts a timeline under your life you didn't choose. Sometimes, even now, I wake to the sense that there's a person standing in the street outside my building, perfectly centered, looking up. When that happens, I don't go to the window. I don't check the camera. I lie still and listen to the room like a man listening to the ocean in a shell, trying to hear a pattern in the rush that will tell him if the tide is coming in or going out, if the water is his, or if it belongs to the other version of his house on the other side of a pane of glass. If I do get up, if I can't help it, I open the blinds a fraction, exactly enough to see what the white of the panel would have shown me anyway. A dark street, a piece of sidewalk, an ordinary door across from mine that opens to a set of stairs. Everyone swears is not a copy of another set of stairs somewhere else. I tell myself this is real, and I keep telling myself, and most nights lately, that's been enough.